Hello, hello, good morning, welcome back again. Um, I apologize, my internet connectivity was having a little bit of issues, so hopefully it will be better by this time. Today is our 12th day of the 21-day challenge on Awaken Your Spiritual Neurons Empire, and I hope you got a chance today to reflect, actually, yesterday, that you got a chance to reflect on all of those dopamine boosts that actually make part of your chemistry and that somehow affect or impact not only your brain but at the same time your body. And we have been actually talking a little bit in regards to uh, what are the things that we need to bring to our consciousness, that we need to get aware while we are actually experiencing a transformational process. And while we are actually gaining the consciousness of new experiences and new feelings and new thoughts, right? We cannot hide from the reality that we still live conditioned to some sort of limiting beliefs, or we live conditioned even to our own addictions, right? So one of the things that I want to bring to your attention today is gaining a little bit more of the awareness of our own mechanisms of defense, gaining awareness of our own ego and the reality of our ego, that we need to understand ego as part of ourselves that somehow protects us from something, protects us from pain, protects us from being hurt. And at the end of the day, uh, ego per se is not something that needs to be seen as something bad, right? Um, Neither something, extremely good. The thing with the ego is simply that it creates masks, right? And when we're talking about mechanisms of defense that somehow don't allow us to be our authentic selves, right? All we're doing with our mechanisms of defense is hiding our true essence. uh, we're hiding, and when we're talking about ego, we need to understand that ego, uh, it's it goes actually beyond um, habits or conditioned beliefs. It actually goes more to the fact that as an essence of being human or experiencing human life, I think what we are actually doing is we are protecting that essence that is still sleeping, or that it's being dormant, which is our soul, right? It's our pure essence. And when we start actually seeing ego and accepting ego or our mechanisms of defense, and of course, when we become conscious of our mechanisms of defense, right, it actually gets easier for us to start transcending them, to start working with them instead of against them, right? And one of the things that I was talking about yesterday was precisely some of the uh, addictions or the habits that all of us have. I had passed through situations. I mean, I had certain habits and compulsions, of course, that I had to deal with along the years. Um, and one of the things that, of course, I wasn't aware at the beginning was the fact that, all those mechanisms of defense, they were creating somehow in my organism and in my brain, they were creating toxic chemistry because they were liberating a lot of um cortisol and adrenaline into my body. And what they were actually doing, they were uh, causing just, side effects in terms of organic pains, like chest pains and construction in my muscles, right? But things like that, right, they were the result precisely of repressed emotions. So one of the things when we're talking about, for instance, dopamine boosts, and we're talking about addictions such as alcohol or such as drug consumption or even, cigarette, um, we're not only talking about uh, addictions that we are using to hide from our pain, right? We are also hiding from our essence, and we're not conscious yet of the reality, of the true reality of ourselves, right? Because we haven't discovered yet who we really are. And since we don't understand our true essence, what happens is we end up comparing with others, right? We end up competing with others. We're talking about that one of the uh, things that happens today is that we live in a society in which uh, we overthink everything, right? In order to compete, in order to compare ourselves. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we are actually using the mechanisms of defense of social media to compare ourselves with other people's, right? We're using the access of TV or the news, right, to justify why we have to feel guilty or why do we have to feel a victim of ourselves. And those are mechanisms of defense that we actually have and we express in a very unconscious way. So I can give you an example of uh, a clear mechanism of defense that I wasn't conscious for a long time. And like when I became conscious of my mechanism of defense, of one of my many mechanisms of defense, then I started actually, working towards transcending that, right? And it was actually intellectualization. Okay, intellectualization. You probably will say, well, is there anything wrong with being intellectual? No, not really. But the thing is that when you use your intellect, right, to seduce or to manipulate and control situations, to gain the attention and to gain the acceptance of people. In other words, when you're using all your intellectual, right, just to be accepted by other people, in reality, what you are hiding, right? You're using the mechanism of defense of the intellectualization, but in reality, what you're hiding is a deep feeling of insecurity because you are actually looking to be accepted, right? So you use intellectualization. Actually, I used to use intellectualization as a weapon, right? As a mechanism of defense. And don't take me wrong. I mean, that's part of actually who I am. I don't see it as a negative mechanism of defense. However, I am aware that in the past I used to use it, right, to feed something that it was hidden behind that mask of the intellect, right, which was the feeling of insecurity. So somehow what I needed to do is I needed to be intellectual to prove to others that I was good enough. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is what is called and I learned this in neuro linguistics. It's what is called a positive intention, right? Every single action and every single behavior that a person has, In reality, what it does is that it hides a mechanism of defense, but it also hides a positive intention, right? To somehow protect us from any possible dangers, right? And we're talking about, uh, in some way, what makes part of our human psyche. Okay, and human psyche, of course, is a portion of our brain, is a portion of our mind. In reality, we're not talking about the brain in this case as an organ. We're talking about, the process of the mind, that elaborates thoughts, right, to justify, to protect, to overcome certain behaviors that we don't like about ourselves, right? Um, so those positive intentions, in reality, what they are is they're additional layers to our ego. Okay, so one of the things, again, is not about eliminating our mechanisms of defense, because at the end of the day we do require mechanisms of defense, in order to be able to deal with the world and the environment that we lived in, right? So I think it's more about transcending them. It's about getting aware or gaining the self-realization that those mechanisms, they exist in our lives, and we need to understand them in such a way that we can make them our friends to benefit us from something, rather than preventing us from seeing our own truth, right? So that's why I gave you this example of what happened to myself, right? I mean, it's like I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, or I'm talking to a camera or to both cameras, right? um, Hoping that somebody of course will be seeing this video, right? But today I am much more aware that I am using my intellect, um, to share with people, right, who may benefit from that, right? Rather than what I used to do in the past, is I used to use my intellectualization mostly, and I had to be honest with myself, to impress. You understand? And this is something that it actually goes beyond any regular mechanisms of defense. But this is a type of behavior, let's say, that we need to start understanding about our ways of behaving and why do we behave. Okay, because that is what it actually, at the end of the day, help us to transcend and to move forward to where we want to go. Okay, now what's the lesson that it's behind that mechanism of defense, uh, like in the case of intellectualization? Once you realize, for instance, that you have been using your intellect, right, to seduce or to get accepted, rather than trying to eliminate it, right, what you can do is you can try to give it a different meaning. And you can start using intellectualization or intellect, right, to feed your mind for higher conscious knowledge, and to share that intellect with others, but with a purpose of benefiting others, right, to gain also awareness, or to gain consciousness of a new experience. So somehow, you can end up using your knowledge and your intellect not to gain acceptance, but rather to contribute, to give. Okay. Now, we can talk about many mechanisms of defense. We can talk about projection. We can talk about rejection. We can talk about identification with the aggressor. We can talk about uh, isolation, right? A lot of mechanisms of defense. Uh, when we start realizing why do we act and why do we behave the way that we do, uh, of course, we take a look at the current behavior or the current mechanisms of defense. But when we peel that mechanism of defense, what we want to try to do is we want to try to see in ourselves or evaluate on ourselves what's behind that mechanisms of defense. So when we're talking about, for instance, a person who wants to or actually identifies with an aggressor, right? When we peel that mechanisms of defense, right? When we realize that we are really identifying with a person that is toxic, right? In reality, what we need to take a look at is what is the fear that we are hiding, right? Or what is the fear that we experience from that person? Is it because we need their acceptance? We need their love? We need to maybe compare ourselves with them? It depends pretty much on, of course, the environment and the way that you have been living your life or you have been relating your life with that person, right? So, in that sense, um, the mechanism of defense becomes conscious not only in the sense of what it's that we are using to protect ourselves. Like when I am identifying with an aggressor, what I'm doing is I'm trying to be like him or identify myself with him, but in reality I'm doing that because I don't want to get, punished, or I don't want to get attacked by that aggressor. So what I do is that in my mind, I click the button to say, well, maybe, if I act like him, right, that person won't attack me. You understand? And in reality, the positive intention of that is being what? It's being, I'm protecting myself against a possible attack. Okay. Now, what can we say about, for instance, projection? Projection is when we actually project the behaviors of other people, like when we judge the behavior of another person, but in reality, what we're doing is we are uh, judging something that it is too hard for us to judge on ourselves because it hurts too much to accept the reality. That's what projection is. It's a mechanism of defense. It's very common. It's very unconscious, right? And only when we start asking ourselves questions as to when I'm judging someone or when I'm pointing the finger at someone, right? What is it that I'm trying to tell to myself that I don't like or that I don't accept on myself, right? And once I peel the mechanism of defense of the projection, I may realize that maybe what's happening is that I have uh, a behavior that is so strong. For instance, guilt, right? Like if I judge someone who is a pain in the ass, or someone who oh, here's one typical example. When I judge a person because that person likes to gossip, okay, in reality, right, what I need to ask myself is, I don't like, I feel uncomfortable because that person gossips. But in reality, right, it's not the the idea that I don't like when the person gossips. I don't like the feeling that I have that I personally myself, I am a gossiper, only that I don't accept it, right? And why? And if I realize that, then I need to ask myself, why am I being a gossiper? Or why do I consider myself that I am a gossiper? Is it because I need attention, maybe? Or because I don't accept myself as I am, that I need to tell other people what I don't like? But in that way, what I do is I interpret the gossip of the other as their own stuff rather than seeing it on myself. You understand what I'm saying? So that's pretty much projection. When we actually judge, other people's behaviors, but we don't see those behaviors in ourselves, or we don't want to accept that the same behaviors that those people have, right, they are a mirror of what we are. Okay. So all that we're doing, in this session is helping you to become aware of your ego, helping you to become aware of your mechanisms of defense, because once you start deconstructing or destroying, part of the personality that you don't want to have anymore, basically what it takes is to do that analysis, to take into consideration all of the behaviors. And there's a matter of, and here's the thing, right? uh, the simple way to start taking a look at our own mechanisms of defense is by looking at the behaviors of others and then absorb them, right, and see what am I learning from that behavior of that person. What is it that behavior, right, is trying to identify with myself? Am I, mm, am I a gasper, or am I an intellectual person that is hiding in reality the need to be accepted? uh, those are the kinds of observations that we want to make, right, to ourselves, so we can become more conscious about, um, those feelings, right? And of course, when we realize that, it may sound that it hurts, but in reality it doesn't. What it does is it actually liberates us from the prison, from the chain that we have been carrying for such a long time, right? That is what it is to become aware of those mechanisms of defense, right? It's to break free from the chain of what has been repressed, right? And when we actually do that, and this is something that we're going to talk in our next session, because hear me out. Now we're going to start entering into a different process, right? Tomorrow in our next series, what we're going to do is we are going to start looking at ourselves in a different perspective. We have become aware of the power that we have in our imagination, with visualization, with mentalization. We have been creating different sorts of new neural paths. We have been talking about how can we expand our consciousness while we are actually working on our own inner dilemmas, right? But now it is the time to start to start seeing all that as part of our living experience, and live and part of our own context, right? Accept it, right? Make peace with it, and again, instead of fighting that, all those dilemmas, right, accept them for what they are, right, and start moving forward, or keep moving forward into feeding uh, the version that we want to construct of ourselves. And for that, we need to start seeing ourselves as the essence that we are, right? So tomorrow, when we actually get into our next series, what we're going to talk about is, who are we? Really, who are we, right? We're not the mechanisms of defense that we have. We're not those projections in reality. We're not the intellectualization, right? We're much more than that. We're greater than that, right? So that's what we're going to try to discover. And so today, what I will like you to experience as a matter of a challenge is, again, take your notebook and make notes of the observations that you do in regards to any attitudes and behaviors that you observe on others, right? That you can bring to your consciousness and start recognizing if those behaviors are behaviors that maybe belong to you. Okay, so observe, write down, and then self analyze, right? How do you identify it with the attitudes and the behaviors of others? All right. So thank you so much for listening to this live. And of course, have a wonderful, blessed day from wherever you are. And I'll see you in the next series. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. God bless.